Hello and welcome to Catamount Community Connection, our weekly Sunday public affairs show. I'm Brian Collamore, the host for the 1 hour program, which we air every Sunday. And we thank people for listening. Some of the listeners have been letting me know off and on that they have been tuned in each week, and that's always a good thing. Our show is brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846. And we're looking forward to the 179th fair, which will be coming up in August of the brand new year, which is just around the corner, 2025. So we are recording this show on the 20th of December, and the mayor of the city of Rutland is with me today. And this will air on the 29th, so we're in between Christmas and New Year's by the time you folks hear this. And again, welcome into Mike Doenges, the mayor of the city of Rutland. And this is kind of our, I don't know if it's a monthly check-in or every 5 or 6 weeks. Yeah, we try. And so it's always good to see you. And,
good to see you, too.
How are things?
Good. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
You, too. Right back at you.
And things are good. I think things are, in the city, Brian, it's interesting to see where we are now versus where we were when I started this job. And it's a visible set of changes in positive ways. And I'm a positive person, so you tend to get that out of me first. Maybe we'd spend a little time talking about some of the challenges today too that we're faced with. But
sure.
But I do think the city seeing movement. And one of the things that you'll relate to is, for many, many years, even with amazing representation of yourself and others in Montpelier, there's always this sentiment that Rutland isn't getting the attention it deserves, that Chittenden County gets all of the money, they get all the time, they get all the effort. And a couple of things that we'll talk about today, it shows that that's changed. We've seen a lot of attention on Rutland, and I think that's not only due to, us stirring the pot down here, but the conversations we have, the intentional nature of the way we're going about things and how successful that's been. So, yeah, I think things are going well, and we're going into the new year, into 2025 with a lot of momentum right now. It's
funny you mentioned that, Michael. We had Legislative Day at the courts. It's now 2 weeks since, because again, I got to remember when people are hearing this. So it was a week ago Monday, and it's interesting because Judge Corsone said the same exact thing. He said that for years, most people down here probably had the impression, he used the term short shrift, that Rutland was getting at the time. And he doesn't feel that's true anymore. He feels that things have turned around quite a bit. And I don't know whether the legislative delegation has a lot to do with that or some to do with that or not anything to do with that. We are, I think, a very responsive group. And when people see us in the grocery stores or wherever we are, or email us or phone us, at least I hope, and I hear that people are getting back to their constituents. So that always makes me feel pretty good. But he said that we really, Rutland is coming on. It really is.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the analogy I use across Rutland is everybody's been rowing in the same direction, but there's been certain things holding us back. And when you think about that mentality, right, and not to use a rowing, to keep up with the rowing analogy, but if you think about a rowing team, right, if you've got 8 guys that are rowing in sync and 2 that aren't, you're not going to get anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to create such turmoil that doesn't work. So we all have to be working together. So while the legislature has been in Montpelier fighting for Rutland, if we haven't been fighting as hard to support you, I think you haven't gotten the momentum that you needed, and we haven't gotten it here either. A good example of that, so we lobbied for some legislation. The city, I spent a ton of time in Montpelier the past 2 years, more the past year than the previous. And we lobbied for some legislation around things like Act 250, mm-hmm. and we lobbied for legislation around things like criminal justice bills. And we saw both of those things benefit Rutland, right? So the criminal justice bill of the petty thefts that were coming from the stores, those being able to consolidate. I'm sure you heard about that on your judicial day.
Yep.
I talked to Ian Sullivan this week, actually, right after you had your meeting. I had my meeting with Ian, and it helped. It helped consolidate things. It helped with a big challenge that they have on the judicial side right now, which is immediacy of consequences. So the analogy I like to use is if your kid breaks a window and they did it intentionally, you're not going to say, you know what, we'll deal with it in 2 to 3 weeks, right? You deal with the consequences of that action immediately because there's a tie, an emotional tie, a mental tie to that action. And the courts have been jammed up so much that that immediacy doesn't exist right now. And this bill that we lobbied for helps, and Rutland benefited from that directly.
Yeah. It's funny, too, also that one of the challenges for the judicial system was the backlog, which was exacerbated by COVID to some great degree. I heard the figure we had somewhere around 2,500 backlog cases, I believe, in Rutland County. That's down by at least 1,000. And what is true, and you have mentioned it before, and certainly Chief Kilcullen when he's been on, that unfortunately a great number of the offenses that occur are committed by the same people.
Right.
And so the percentage, if you can take that person, and as you say, we always talk about accountability, and someone made a really good point the other day that accountability is okay to say, but what is probably more accurate is that there are consequences to what you do in terms of behavior, and that carries with it, I think, almost a more accurate, and it is a negative thing in many ways. Consequences seems to indicate that there'll be something bad happening, and that's okay. But anyway, the point was that the backlog that they've been able to clear doesn't involve as many people as there are the number of cases. It's just that it's the same people, it seems, over and over and over again.
And that bill was helpful. And the other thing that was helpful is, Ian, when I met with Ian right when I got into the position, right when I was elected mayor, I mean, within a week, I was in his office saying, what can we do on the public safety side? What can we do from the city to help you get what you need? And he told me about that backlog. And at the time, it was 2,200 cases. Okay. That's huge. So I said, why? He said, there's not enough judges. I said, do you have enough staff? He said, no, but that's not really the issue. The issue we're up against is there's not enough judges and not enough time in the courtroom to get these things passed, to move things along. So the police chief and I took Chief Kilcullen and we went to Montpelier and we had a couple of conversations and that was on day one. We talked to you, we talked to Tom Burdett, we talked to Senate Judiciary as well. Will was up there at the time. We had those conversations. And one contact I made with Judge Zone. And Judge Zone is kind of overall, he's the administrator of the judges, so to speak, right? And we talked about, and he can't say much, right? It's a really precarious place, politicians in the judiciary. But we talked to him about the need for additional attention to try to relieve the backlog in Rutland because it was impacting our policing, it was impacting our city, and it worked to the point that he said, here are the things that need to be done to make this happen. So he told us why there were gaps, how the judicial nominating process works, all these different things. The next time I was in Montpelier, I got to sit down with the governor. I told him we needed the extra supports in Rutland. Why can't we have another judge appointed? And he explained to me his challenges, but I asked him to put an extra urgency on it. Between the conversations with you, the governor, Judge Zone, and a couple others, within a month, we had another judge appointed to cover Rutland. It's stuff like that, just working through and showing the urgency that I think, we talk about Rutland of old versus Rutland now and the attention we're getting. That attention it literally takes being the squeaky wheel sometimes. Mm-hmm. And it's working. Brian, we're down to what? He said 1,600 cases something backlog? Like that, yeah. That's a massive drop in 2 years. Yeah. That's huge. And they're trying most of these cases. They're settling some out for sure. But it's good work. And I'll let Ian speak to it when he comes on because I know he likes to come on your show too.
Yeah.
But it's really positive for our community.
We did manage to, and we got thanked for 4 new positions that were funded in the judiciary, and some of those were new judges. There were also security measures that we enhanced. In our county, it's the Rutland County Sheriff's Department that provides the security at the court, and we were able to make that a little bit better by hiring some new folks. So the judges are very appreciative of that, and you're right. Judge Zone was there on Legislative Day. And there were, I think, 6 of us that had a chance to meet in chambers apart from everybody else so that you could, in a way, speak frankly. You're right. There's an appropriate sort of distance between the branches of government. So he can't probably say what he really feels like saying sometimes. But it was clear that because I kept saying, if there are more things that you want us to do, please let us know. And they did make a couple of suggestions about tweaking some statutes that would be helpful. We did take the $200 cap that was in place at one point, and that was the maximum that a judge could impose on conditions of release, and that's now gone. So the judge has a little more discretion. He could make it $5,000 or $10,000, and in many cases they have. We had, unfortunately, a really recent example of, and I think they'd be the first to admit it, of a system that's not working very well up in St. Johnsbury with the officer that got shot after being let out of jail only days before. And this was quite obviously a guy that's, had a checkered past, as they used to say. He had, 25 or 30 felonies, and somehow he got out, and he managed to take a shotgun with pellets and shoot the officer. Luckily, he had a vest, but some of it went up into his neck. He's since been released from the hospital, and he's going to be fine. But, that's an example of, and when people hear that, the general public, and I can't blame them in the least, they say, what is going on? Why can't we just pick these guys up and throw them in jail?
Yeah, and Brian, you and I know because we're in this every day, but it's a breakdown of multiple systems, right? It's a little, I was trying to explain this to somebody, and the recipe thing came the closest to it. You can bake bread 27 different ways, right?
Yeah.
The recipe, you can change a little bit of the recipe and you'll get a little bit of a different output. But what's happened in Vermont over the past 20, 25 years is we've changed the recipe in multiple areas in multiple ways, and now what you're getting out is a hard loaf of nothing, right? Like, you change the bail laws, then you change a little bit of the parole laws, then you understaff the parole board, then the prisons don't get the funding that they need, and then you're not dealing with the substance use the way you should be, and all of those little changes that individually don't seem like big deals, when they come together, you end up with a system that has now broken down to a point where we can't support our officers who are trying to support our communities because they don't have the tools anymore to do the job. And that's what I think we're starting to undo. So removing that $200 limit was huge. Putting together a way to quantify multiple misdemeanors into one felony was massive, and Vermont's not the first state to do that because of challenges like this. One of the things that we talked about the other day that I'm going to be pushing for is legislation around very specifically gun use, but in drug crimes, right? So Ian and I talked about this. He suggested that we really look at drug dealers that have possession of weapons or gun thefts from vehicles. Do you know that if you steal a gun from somebody's vehicle, or any gun from anyone's house, their vehicle, wherever, if the gun is less than $900, it's a misdemeanor? Yeah. Like, that's crazy. There's not a gun owner, a lawful gun owner in the state of Vermont that wouldn't want their gun theft to be a felony. Right. So those two things, we talk about gun legislation, it's a touchy subject, but neither of these pieces of legislation are going to be things that I think are going to get pushback. And then one of the things that I talked to Ian about, and I'm not sure we can get this through in Montpelier this year, but I also talked to Tom and I met with him, is around specifically dealing of illegal or controlled substances. The laws in Vermont are very kind of iffy on this, and that's part of the reason we have a hard time holding people accountable. The example that was used, if a $20 bag of heroin is sold, there's only so many consequences to that. And if you do it 3, 4, 5 times, it's the same consequence. Whereas like a DUI or other crimes have escalating consequences. The second time you do it, it's more. The third time you do it, it's more. It's really important for us to look at that escalating consequence stack. So we're going to be working on that in Rutland City to put up to the legislature, because we have drug dealer issues in Rutland. I mean, there's no question with that. And drug dealers will not inform on the bigger chain because there's no consequences to inform. So I don't necessarily think that putting somebody in prison that's selling a $20 bag of heroin for 20 years is what we need to do. That's, maybe they're in a situation, I don't like it, they shouldn't be doing it, I don't want it in my community. But leveraging the ability to say, hey, you've hit some real consequences here, and if you can give us information on people above you, we can kind of ease those consequences. We don't have that tool in the toolbox right now, and it needs to be there.
Yeah. The other thing that came up, and I don't mean to keep talking about the Judicial Day, but I've enjoyed it a lot, and it's really rewarding to be able to sit in court and watch a trial that's going on and see the interplay between the plaintiff and the defendant and the judge. We didn't see any jury trials the other day, so all of them were bench trials. But one of the things that came up, which is I think Vermont led the way. I know Rutland was the first in the state of Vermont to do it. And when it was put into play, it was called drug court. Francis McCaffrey, our beloved judge of old, came up with the idea along with Senator Peg Flory at the time. I think the two of them worked very closely on that. We don't call it drug court anymore. We call it treatment court. I don't know exactly why we can't use the other term, but anyway, so now it's treatment court. And it just so happened on that day, we were able to go back, if legislators chose, to watch what goes on in treatment court. And they've since separated. There are female defendants and male defendants. And I stayed for an hour and a half and watched a good probably 20 people go through. Judge Valenti, John Valenti, was the original, or not the original maybe, but
he most recent, yeah.
And now he's been reassigned. I think he's down in Bennington on occasion and up in Addison. So he's not the only guy doing it. I believe it was either Judge Griffith or Griffin that was the judge, the presiding judge. But it was really amazing to see. It's a relaxed atmosphere, first of all, and this is a courtroom. And what happens is whoever is charged with whatever offense, sometimes it's alcohol, sometimes it's hard drugs, they have to plead guilty to the charge first.
Right.
And that opens the door for them to take two different paths. One of them is to get treatment, to stay clean and sober, and to complete it and become a contributing member. And the other is, if you mess up, you're going to jail.
That's right.
There's no doubt about it. And I can't imagine, just from a personal point of view, anybody being better than John Valenti to handle that courtroom.
He did such a good job.
But I was really impressed with this other guy, too, that day. And again, it was kind of a conversation. They would come up and they would sit in the defendant's chair, and he'd say to them, how are things going? You know, what challenges have you met? Have you got a job? All that kind of stuff. So I was really impressed with that. I know we're the first in the state to do it, and not every county has treatment court. I don't think Bennington does at all, but some of the other surrounding counties might. And I don't know how many other states do it, but to me, it represents a really good way to not always put people in jail, but to give them that leeway, but knowing that the consequence, if they mess up, they are going to go to jail.
And that's the word. There it is again, right? Yeah. It is the consequence, and it's that immediacy of consequence. And it's interesting to watch, because when you watch these judges, they talk to them in such a way that it reminds me of the way that you talk to your kids, not in a condescending way,
right,
but in look, you didn't hold up your end of the bargain.
Yeah.
Your end of the bargain was to go through a week and take a clean urine test and come back here and move to the next step. And that didn't happen. And because that didn't happen, you don't get the reward this week, and you're going to have to do this extra thing. Yeah. And when you watch that, what you recognize is that a lot of the people that are going through the treatment court didn't have that in their life at some point. Like it's almost like shocking to watch their reactions. Yeah. And when you see after they go through the process and they graduate and they come out the other side, they get it. Like they get it and they take a different path. So go back to what I was saying earlier, like the charges for, maybe somebody is selling a $20 bag of heroin because they're in a tight spot and they need the cash, and we don't want that. But they're not really the problem. It's the drug dealers that are bringing stuff into the community. Right. That conversation between treatment court, the ability to look at those consequences, the ability to actually impose some consequences, and then have that system work the way it does in other states is really important. But Rutland is blessed with treatment court. We have had amazing graduates that are contributing members of our society today, even work in the recovery services and help other people go through that process. And it does work really well. And the ones who don't commit and don't work with it, they do suffer that consequence of having their prison time. And that is the way the law works, and that's where they should be if they're not going to own up to their actions. You know what I mean?
The other element to this, and I think it's a crucial one, is there is, and I think Chief Kilcullen assigns it, there is a designated police officer that attends every treatment court. Sometimes it's the chief. Quite often it's also, guess who? Emilio Rosario. And again, just a perfect person to be in that courtroom. And what the defendants see is support from him. And he's not there to try to, drop a dime on him and send him back. He's there to support him, and he just does a great job. And it was obvious from some of the comments that the folks who are still, having challenges would make about how nice it was. They felt that the judge was on their side, the police are on their side, the community's on their side. So, without that support, it is a revolving door after a while, and this is one piece of it that works. And I don't know what the percentage of people but I'm sure it's very low.
It's a very low recidivism rate. And, you could talk to Eric McGuire, your colleague up in Montpelier, and he'll tell you the same thing. It's one of the best systems. And that's what we want. I mean, these are our community members. So we want everybody to be a good contributing member. So we want to encourage them to do well in these programs. Our police officers are just as much coaches as they are officers of the law. They try to help people get to where they need to be. When they see someone in need of treatment, they recommend them to a treatment center if they want to go. And that's part of the legislation piece that, we need to work on too. I think one more thing, if we talk about what we're going to be pushing up to Montpelier that's tied to this, I think it's 84% of our petty thefts in Rutland and our larcenies are directly connected to substance use. Directly connected. They are known substance users. We know that they're stealing to supplement their life or supplement their income so that they can buy more substances. The problem the challenge that we see in the state of Vermont is Medicaid only covers a 14-day stay at a treatment center. And after that 14-day, you can extend, but it's a 50% cut. You talk to anybody who is in the space of recovery, especially with the drugs that are being used today, and 14 days is not enough to get somebody off that drug and back on their feet, even if they want to, even if they have all the desire in the world. Addiction's a real thing, and whether that comes after you start using it or before, it's a real thing. And these addiction centers that can help with addiction, people need more time in the space. So we're going to be talking about, and it's literally an allocation of funds and how we allocate. Just saying, hey, let's extend that stay for a longer period, that first initial stay, and then talk about those extensions at a certain rate. And I've asked both of our federal senators' offices to step up and support that from the federal side as well and provide more Medicaid funds to Vermont. The reason is because that's where the funding comes to do this. So it's a slippery slope, but if we can do this both in the correctional system and out of the correctional system and provide those additional supports, what we hope to see is an improvement for those people that are struggling with substance use and a reduction of crime due to the fact that they're getting the help they need, whether it's in treatment court or before they ever get there. So those are some of the things that we're working on together. So
we're talking with Rutland City Mayor Mike Doenges today on Catamount Community Connection. We need to take our first break on the program, and we'll be back here in just a minute. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection. I'm Brian Collamore, your weekly host for this one-hour show each and every Sunday, brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846, and the 179th Fair is coming up this coming August, 2025. It's weird to say that 2025, but by the time you folks hear this show, it'll be the 29th. So it's
a few days away.
A few days away, exactly. So we've talked a little bit about the judicial system and the inherent challenges still there, and some of the great work that's being done by everybody involved with the court. And let's move into something else that was the number one topic, if you will, in the recently concluded, it seems like it was years ago now, but it was only a month ago, November, that we had the election. And all throughout the summer and fall, that's all we heard was that you folks up there better figure out how to make Vermont more affordable. It's really getting to be way too expensive for, especially those on fixed incomes, to stay here, basically.
Yeah.
So we will be focused on that. We have had occasion to meet with the governor's office, multiple times now, 5 or 6 times, and that remains the number one priority for sure. It's all, dovetailing with housing and Act 250, further reform, the public safety issue, which we talked a little bit about as well on the program, but affordability. And when you say that, most people automatically think about property taxes, and we use those taxes to fund our educational system and the costs therein. So I'll just open it up, and I'm sure that it's on the mind of mayors and select board all over the state.
So we're hitting the heavy bag today. So we start with public safety, and we move over to the affordability piece, and it's a good thing. It's a great conversation to have. So Rutland City just finished its budget process. So what happens is, as mayor, I have to submit my budget by November 1st to the Board of Aldermen, and then they take about a month and a half to kind of work through it and make some cuts. This year, much like last year, I asked my department heads for the same thing. I said, give me what you think you need to operate at the best of your ability in this coming year. So when I received the submitted budgets from everybody, it was around a 12% increase over last year. It's very high, and that's not something that Rutlanders can stomach. It's not something anybody probably could stomach right now, especially in Vermont. And there's so many reasons for that, and we could talk about the school budgets and how that eats into municipal, and how, since the school budget is, let's talk about it for a second. And it's a very complicated process, and it's something the legislature is going to look at fixing or at least alleviating somewhere. But our school budgets are based on what we pay on our tax bill is based on what comes from Montpelier.
Right.
So even if Rutland Public Schools budget shrinks, we may still end up paying more because the entire state needs more, right? So it's a very hard thing. So when we see those numbers come in, for many, many years, the city side of your tax bill has been making adjustments to try to keep the tax rate low. And what that has done is that has put the city at a place where we run on a shoestring budget, and our shoestrings are pretty torn and tattered, meaning we have very little, if any, there's no frivolity. Look at the budget, download it, talk to any of our department heads. There's no frivolity in the Rutland City budget. It's very, very cut and dry, bare bones down to what we need to run the city, which is great. And that's how it should be, in all honesty. Last year, we had to adjust for inflation. Tons of our costs went up. And, in all honesty, we did some shuffling to try to make some things work. And it worked out well. We did go up, but we didn't go up where other municipalities went up 14, 15, 18%. Rutland went up 7% across the board with the schools. So we were in a better place than some others. This year, though, getting that 12% from my department heads and looking at that and saying, listen, last year was the hit. It was a big year. And people were loud and clear about the fact that affordability is key. Not that it didn't matter last year, but it matters across the board. We have to do our best job to get this down as far as possible. So when I sent my budget to the aldermen, I sent it along with a note saying I would like to see this below 4%. Even below 3% is where I want to be. I want it to be at below 3%, but I wanted to give them options. And that's slightly different than what other mayors have done in the past. They present a budget that doesn't have options in it and ask to cut from there. The reason I presented it that way is we have a very active board. Every member of our board really cares about what's going on in the community for the most part and has different perspectives on it. And giving them a couple of choices was really important to me this year. So what I did is I submitted a 6% budget to the board and asked them to cut it down to below 3%, and that's exactly where we landed. They chose the options that they wanted to. We had a couple of cuts here and there, and I can explain some of the reallocations too. But where we landed was at 2.8%, 2.78, but 2.8%, which is amazing. It's a great place to be. Now, when we say it's a 2.78% increase, what that means is it's still an increase over last year, right? So my other mission for the second half of this year up until July 1st is going to be to keep spending as low and as conservative as possible, right? We have some unfilled positions. And in the past, other mayors have said, well, we're going to use that money from unfilled positions to do these other things. But if we can combine the new budget cuts and keep our spend low in this year, we could actually see our tax rate, at least on the city side, come down. And I would like to do that. I would like to work towards that goal. Doesn't mean we're going to achieve it on the spend side, but we could very possibly do it. And we're going to work our rear ends off to get there. But I'm really happy with the cuts and the changes that were made. I'm very proud of the board and the department heads for all working together. We got to a great place. We made some sacrifices. So I'll talk about that for a second. We made some sacrifices, but not without some guarantees. So what I mean by that is in police and fire, we had some staffing changes. Police department, in order to save on overtime, which their overtime was $500,000 a year in overtime. In order to save on overtime, we said for $150,000 or so, we can hire 3 new staff members. We can cut that overtime down to $150,000. So combined, that's $300,000 versus $500,000. That's a huge savings. That's a $200,000 savings there. So we did that, but instead of getting 3 new firefighters, that went down to 2. But we said, hey, Fire Chief Bill, if you can fill those 2 positions and be fully staffed, we will, from the unassigned fund balance fund, the board will allow that 3rd officer to be hired. So not in the budget, but we do have reserves that we can use to pay that officer for a year. So that was one change. The other was the police department. So our police department for years has had struggled to fill positions. And going into the year that we're in now, we were at 34 sworn officers in those positions, ready to hire our 35th. And just because of circumstances, retirements, things that are happening, by the end of this fiscal year, we'll probably be at 31. So the chief came in asking for 35, and we ended up budgeting for 33. And saying to the chief, with no stipulations, no strings attached, if you can hire those 33, the board will support an additional 34th, and then if you can hire the 34th, we'll support the additional 35th through those unassigned, those reserves that we save for the buffer. That's huge. That means that Rutland is getting what they need if we can make it there without putting it on the additional burden on the taxpayers. And then the last thing I think that was pretty major to the budget cuts this year was we did look at paving, right? And we looked at paving and sidewalks, and we received an FY24, so fiscal year 24, which was last year, essentially. So we're in fiscal year 25 now. We received $1.6 million in the 1% option tax. There hasn't been a plan or a program for that. We allocated some of it to paving this year, and the board did decide to allocate some of it to paving and sidewalks for next year and take that out of the budget. Now, we don't want to do that permanently because we need to maintain our roads, and there's only so much of that money left to go around after we put this capital improvement plan in place. But doing it this year and then eking it back in next year will actually allow us to keep the budget low and keep increases at a norm. So I'm really happy with what we got out of there. And I think the citizens of Rutland are going to be pretty excited about the fact that they're not seeing a major jump, at least on the city side this year as well.
Pretty sure most taxpayers know that when they get their property tax bill, I don't want to say half of it, it's more like probably 65 or 70% of it, is because of the education costs associated with that half of it. The municipal budget is the other complementary piece to that, and then together they come up with a particular increase, I guess is the way it looks at it. And so I'm hoping, and again, it all will depend on how the legislature and the administration approach the coming biennium, but the governor is very hopeful, I'll just use that adjective, that we can maintain a 0% increase in the educational piece of it. And to do that, there are going to have to be very basic structural changes in the way that we do that, in terms of, we're, in my view, a little heavy on the administrative side of our educational system. We've got a number of supervisory unions. We have a number of superintendents. We have people in the classroom that we didn't have years ago. Not saying that any of that is wrong. I'm just stating facts. So I think there'll be at least a everything on the table kind of outlook on the education side. And then whether we continue to fund it with property taxes or whether we look to income. If we do it with income, as is true all of the time, there'll be new winners and there'll be new losers. And I don't know what the magic number is, but if you make a certain amount of money a year, and that's what you claim on your federal taxes, you will pay more if you exceed that threshold. And I don't know what the threshold is. Is it $300,000 a year? Is it $500,000? I don't know. That will remain to be seen. And then everybody that's under that would, in essence, pay a little bit less, maybe, than they're paying now for property. So there's an argument to be made and a case to be made to go both ways. Maybe it's a little bit of property tax and a little bit of income. I don't know how that's all going to come out. That will be the work that's been, looking forward to by a lot of people on education committees in both the House and the Senate. So anyway, the governor is really hopeful that we can keep the taxpayers held harmless on the educational side. And if a municipal budget like Rutland's comes in at 2.8% increase, I mean, it's never nice to have an increase, but compared to what could have been and what was in fact the case last year, I think most people would at least be somewhat happy.
Yeah, I think so too. You know, affordability is the word that comes up across the board, and you've said it a couple of times, and so have I. When we look at, it's funny because when you look at the way people live their lives, like what can they buy for groceries? What do they spend on entertainment, living, things like that? And the government is a piece of it, and it's the default piece. It's the one you can't get out of, so to speak, right? You can cut back on your cable bill. You can cut back on eating out. You can, maybe buy the cheaper gas or travel less. Those are things you can do, but your tax bill, it can't go down, right? The only thing you can do is sell your house, and that's not what we want.
Right.
So we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're not the flexible side of people's, and we don't want to take up the flexibility for them either. People want to live a comfortable life. Some people are just struggling to get by. So we have to be careful, Brian. And I think that, Montpelier struggled with that for the past few years. I think that we all are. Everybody sees the need to continue providing services and providing what our piece is. But, you've heard me use the analogy a million times if you listen to me. We're a city that is built for 30,000. We have 15,000 people here. And the city of Rutland can do one of two things. It can shrink or it can grow. If it shrinks, we cut our police department, we cut our fire department, we cut our DPW department, and the services that people demand go away. So that's not really the option. So instead of driving the 72-passenger school bus with 30 passengers in it, which is what we're doing, we need to drive the 72-passenger school bus with 72 passengers in it. We need to grow the population here. It's why we make the efforts into the housing growth. It's why we make the efforts into the economic development. We need to get people here paying those tax bills so that you and I are paying 50% of what we're paying now, because the costs won't change, but the amount of money coming in will. And that's because there's going to be more people to pay for it. So it's like splitting that bus or splitting the pizza in half. Like you're paying half. That's the goal. To get people to pay less, we have to grow the population. So affordability we can cut, but it's only going to get us so far. And when we hit that limit, which I think we really have at the city over the years, and I know the state's starting to look at it, that's only going to get them so far too. Because in all honesty, moving from property tax to income tax is the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a different group paying for it. So it's really, in the state of Vermont, it's a mission of the governor's. In the city of Rutland, it's a mission of mine. We have to grow the population. We have to. So. The
other intersection here is with the federal landscape. We have a new president about to be sworn into office, I think, on January 20th. And the energy policies that have existed for the last 4 years were markedly different from the ones that were in effect before that. I don't know whether, to me, it was only logical that because the energy policies changed, that caused inflation, in my view, because there's so much that depends on the transportation sector of the economy. And when those costs rose, everything else went up, too. I mean, if it costs more to deliver fruits and vegetables and meat to the grocery stores, then the cost of those items is going to go up as well. And if we can get our energy costs back down to where they were, and inflation is going down instead of, I don't even want it to stay the same. I think it should be dropping. Mm-hmm. That will help as well.
Yeah, I think things like that, I look at the local level. I try to stay out of the national, but we can do that. You're right. Policy can impact cost. And in Rutland, we actually get this really good transition because we get burned on that a little bit. You've been in a couple meetings with me on something called the 3-acre rule.
Yep.
We've got imposed fees, fines, and engineering needs on these businesses. And it's heavily set on businesses. So the rule basically says if you have more than 3 acres of impervious surface, you need to remediate that stormwater that your property is going to create. And you need to do it in certain ways. And if you can't, you have to pay a fine. This is where that partnership with the state and partnering together comes back in. We have basically gone back to the state and said, since this wasn't grandfathered, these fines are outrageous. And think about that. Let's say those fines stay in place. The people that own those businesses, and the Vermont Agricultural Society is one of those places that has 17 acres of impervious surface.
Yep.
Think about what it's going to cost to go to the fair if they have to pay for these fines. Think of what it's going to cost to get services out of these other buildings that have that problem, they aren't going to be able to pull that out of some bank reserve that they just got sitting there. That's not going to happen. So those costs get passed along to everybody. So we have to look at regulation and how it affects. I mean, this even comes from the state down to municipalities too, right? There's a lot of regulation that's been placed on municipalities over the years and no funds for it. And the state can't find the funds either. So we have to be careful when we put these things in place to look and calculate the cost of that regulation when it goes into place. Otherwise, it's going to have an impact that uncalculated costs, like it's going to hit the wallet fast and hard, and that we can't have that anymore.
Well, I'm heartened by at least some of things that are going on. We have this Doge group, and
love him or hate him, Elon's a pretty smart guy.
Yeah, if he and what's his name, Vivek, can figure out a way to make the cuts that are just superfluous to most way of thinking, I think that's a good thing, and I think some of that may be getting back to the states at some level. And, we have to live within our means. I mean, we've been saying that for a long time, and it just hasn't happened yet. So we'll see how things sugar out, but it should be a pretty interesting session. You and I have already been on this show after the election happened, and the balance, and I think Vermont was the leading state in terms of the turnaround for political parties. We picked up, I think it was 18 House seats and 6 Senate seats.
For the Republican
we being
Party.
The Republicans.
Yep.
And so there's a little bit more balance. In the Senate, it's now 17 Democrats or progressives versus 13 Republicans. And in the House, it's 56. And then I can't do the math that quickly in my head, subtracted from 100. So I think it's 80, 83, something like 84. So I think that will change people's way of thinking about particular bills if they know that if the governor vetoes something, there's a better than good chance that it will be sustained.
Yeah.
So.
I think, Brian, I think you're right. I think the mentality will be a collaborative one for the first time in a while. And that's really important for Rutland, right? And I hate to bring everything back home, but it's my job. So it's really important for Rutland to have that collaboration because we are not Killington, we're not Stowe, we're not these communities where there's extra cash flow. And not to say that everybody in those communities has the extra cash flow, but those tend to be the tourist locations where people buy second and third homes, and there's a little bit less responsibility for that property tax bill where they can just afford to pay it. So looking at the collaboration and to see some reasonable action come out of Montpelier in the next 2 years is going to be exciting. And I think it's going to be beneficial on the side of public safety, on the side of affordability, on the side of where funds get distributed and how we spend our budget. We're working with the state right now to try to do some urgent homeless housing, but we're looking at the state saying, hey, we have to prioritize. We can't service everybody. That wasn't the way we were talking 6 months ago. Right. The state is now saying the same thing that Rutland has been saying for the past 2 years. We need to prioritize families with children first, elderly that are disabled second, and then elderly third, and then continue from there. And the state is saying the same thing. And it's not because we want to choose one over another. It's because there's only so many resources, and we're not going to be able to grow those resources magically. So we have to focus those resources. So you'll see the state working on that in the city too. And I think it's a real advantage to having definitely a better mix in Montpelier than there was before, to have voices heard that maybe were lost in the background.
Well, as a member of the minority party for the last 10 years, I agree with you. It's going to be a different tempo out when we get back up there for sure.
Sure.
We're talking with the Rutland City Mayor, Mike Doenges, and we're about 2/3 of the way through the show, so we need to take our second break, and we will be coming back here in just a minute. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection, our weekly Sunday public affairs show here at Catamount Radio. And it's brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society. The Vermont State Fair at Rutland has been here for now 178 years. We're looking forward to the 179th year for the fair coming up this August. I'm Brian Collamore, your host, and today our guest is the City of Rutland's Mayor, Mike Doenges, who has announced for re-election. And we've talked a little bit about a lot of different things. Let's talk about housing and we have about, 10 or 11 minutes left in the show. So let's, if we can, kind of switch gears, because it's all interrelated. I mean, we keep talking about the population needing to increase, not just in Rutland City or Rutland County, but the state. And the only way to do that is to make sure that people can come here and take jobs and bring their family and have a place to live.
Yeah.
What an idea.
What a concept.
Yeah. So how are we doing?
So good. It's awesome that we're going to talk about this for a minute. We have talked about it in the past, but I want to talk about some of the successes around it. If you look at the challenge in Rutland, people are like, well, we still have the same number of houses. Why are there less people? And it has a lot to do with the analogy that I use is my family, right? We grew up in a house. There was a house of 6, my 2 parents, 4 kids. Now we've all gone up and gone our own way, and my parents are still living in their house. There's only 2 people. That's a 2/3 reduction in the population of that household. That's happened all throughout the city. We have lots of people that are living 2 people to a 4-bedroom house because we do have a population that is slightly older and people have moved on and out. And I'm a good example, and I think you could understand this example too. My kids are living at home right now, and they could totally be in an apartment. They both have jobs, and they could totally be in an apartment, which I would have been at 21 years old. I was, actually. But there's no place for them to go. Mm-hmm. So the challenge is there. The need is there. We know that. For this growth, for this separation, for this ability to put more people in more places. So for the past 2 years, the Mayor's Task Force on Housing has been working towards achieving goals. So this is myself. It's myself and a couple of private developers, a couple of public entities, our affordable housing team, just people that are really truly focused on housing. It's about 12 to 14 of us, depending on the day that we have the meeting. We worked on a few major things. We wanted to establish specific funding for getting housing development built in Rutland. We wanted to remove barriers for housing in Rutland, and we wanted to market the community as a good place to do business for developers. We wanted to set some goals. So what you saw is last year, I set a goal of 1,000 units over a 5-year period, and we're on track. I'll talk about the numbers in a minute as to how we're on track. But we're on track to that. And that may seem big and lofty, but you got a couple of developers that come in and build 250 unit buildings. You get 2 of those, well, you're halfway there, right? So it's not too difficult to achieve. In other municipalities, 1,000 units is nothing. So we're capable there. So we set that goal. And in that process, we applied for something called 10% in Vermont as this group, saying, hey, we would love to use some of that money that Treasurer Mike Pichek put out there, using the state surplus funds that sit in the bank accounts, to build market rate housing in Rutland. So we have developers that do affordable housing, the Housing Trust and the Housing Authority. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about market rate housing, so that those people that are living in the 4-bedroom home, and it's just the 2 of them, if they want to move to an area that's a little more accessible without having to mow the lawn, maybe they get a nice 2-bedroom apartment, they can move and free up their house. Or maybe a young couple can move into a 2-bedroom apartment or a 1-bedroom apartment and have space to grow. We don't have a lot of that right now because that space isn't available, but demand is. So we made this request, and at the time, we didn't win some of that quote unquote grant money to do that. That ended up going to VHFA to focus on affordable housing, right? So we continued to push into the treasurer's office a couple different ways. We partnered up with Heritage Family Credit Union as maybe the bank that could back it. The treasurer's office looked at what we really needed in Rutland. We had the time. I sat down with Mike multiple times and said, we really need to look at that market rate housing space, and it needs to be new units in the city. And after another year working on it, the treasurer and the Heritage came to an agreement to be able to use that money, and that money is specifically $8 million for new housing units in Rutland, not existing, new housing units in Rutland City, within the city boundaries, not just not the county, but the city of Rutland. And that money, there's 3 qualifications because it runs through my office first when people want to apply. Is it in the city? Are you in good standing, the applicant in good standing with the city, and does it bring new units online? And if so, it passes from my office, and then the Heritage starts working on the loans. So that started about 2 months ago. We got that approved, low interest loans, 3.5%, in these 2 tranches. The big tranche is $5 million for multiple units, so 5+ units, and the small tranche is for 4 and under units. And it really it's a good, because you can structure the loans in a real easy way. In the 2 months, Brian, we've seen $6 million in applications already.
Wow.
The demand was there. I mean, in the first 2 weeks, we saw $4 million in applications. It was amazing. The developers that were waiting in the wings for the right funding, the right rental rates, the right pricing, the right loan rates. To see how quickly people applied for that within the city of Rutland. Like, again, small city, landmass, only 15,000 residents, to see that happen. And when you take those loan applications and you calculate our permit applications that we've looked at in the past year for new units, new housing units, plus the hotel, plus a couple other things, we're upwards of 200 units that'll be created in the next year or two. That's massive. Now, that's if all the loans get approved and all the development gets done. But just to see that, Rutland hasn't seen that kind of numbers in the permitting process and in this type of process in years. So setting the goal, putting the programs in place have done the work. We talked about affordability earlier. Everything we've done on housing hasn't touched a dime of taxpayer dollars, really. I mean, yes, we're doing work in my office, and yes, my executive administrator is helping me, so maybe we could say there's a little bit of money that's gone into it, but really the effort has all been through partnerships and through smart decision making. So the partnerships with the state and Heritage to put this in place. Mike Pichek, I met with him again the other day. I said, Mike, would you have done this in other communities? He said, no, the city is leading the charge. Heritage stepped up to the plate. We couldn't have done this anywhere else, right? We couldn't have done this anywhere else because you guys had a mission and a goal for those 1,000 units. This is what works. So that's the first part. Then the city, we lobbied for the Act 250 changes. So we are making Rutland more attractive to developers by saying we're going to remove restrictions on building here. And along with those Act 250 changes came S311, and the two bills were merged, 687 and S311. We've got 3-year tax stabilization for people who are going to be working on housing in our downtown area and our neighborhood development areas. That's huge. So now we have people that can get tax stabilization, developers that can make those numbers work. So then the city said, my office talking with the RRA, we said, there's another thing that gets in the way. Our permit fees, specifically our wastewater and water allocation fees, are extremely expensive. So somebody who's going to build a 20-unit building was going to have to pay upwards of $18,000 just to say, I need to use water and sewer. It gets them no other value. No one comes out and inspects water and sewer. It was just to say, I need an allocation of water and sewer. Well, we know our systems can handle that water and sewer because the infrastructure is built for 30,000. So talking to a DPW department, talking to our engineering team, we said, hey, what if we incentivized housing and took that rate from $4 per gallon down to 25 cents per gallon if you're building housing, not if you're building an office building, but we want to incentivize housing. So we did it. The board approved it. And that same permit that would have cost $18,000 now costs $800. So we're incentivizing development through making intelligent decisions, and it's not costing anyone anything because this development wouldn't happen if we didn't do that. And that's just the housing example, right? We've got all sorts of other things in the works where we're trying to ease the process at City Hall to getting your permits done. I've got a great team in building and zoning, that helps people walk through the permit process. They'll even walk them down to DPW in the clerk's office to make sure they have everything filled out. That's a human-based one. We want to actually make the system easier, so you fill out one application and it submits to all your permits, but that's a couple years out because that takes time. That's a piece of it, but look at what's going on with the downtown hotel right now. I know that we've been working on a downtown hotel since the old hotel burned down, but we've got a developer that wants to get it done. We're trying to find the funding sources, again, maybe through this 10% Vermont, through other stuff. That's not the city's role, but we're connecting those, helping connect those dots. And we're having conversations right now, both at the RA, at the Board of Aldermen, in committee, in my office, about a development agreement that will allow them to come in and build that hotel with the lowest amount of cost and the least amount of red tape with the city and do it all in one shot. And yes, when you think about tax stabilization agreements and reducing permit fees for a big development like that, the argument is well, what if someone else comes in and wants to do that? Are we setting a precedent? Well, if somebody else wants to build a second $35 million hotel in my town, I will absolutely have the similar conversation to see if it works, because that type of development is what we need. So I know I've been talking for a while here, but the idea with development The housing piece is a big part. Housing drives economic development. Residents drive economic development. The more people that are here to live in those houses, yes, that's one way they're going to go out. They're going to spend money. They're going to eat food. They're going to go to stores. But also, don't forget, somebody's got to build those houses, build those units. That's jobs. That's job creation. That's skilled labor, which Vermont is striving to develop more of. It's a very tight ecosystem when we focus on these developments and focus on making our city development friendly. So my goal is within the next 2 months, with the policy changes that we're working on and a couple of things that we're gonna try to finalize in TPW that touch the 3-acre rule, is to make Rutland the most developable city in Vermont by the end of February. Like, really, we're on track to do it. And the legislation that we've seen passed this year and the things that we're doing in the city are really going to tip that notch. And when we do, we'll be able to call developers from around, the Northeast and say, come here, develop here. You'll be able to come in and do your business and be profitable.
And of course, we need to develop construction workers too to do it.
Huge.
The workforce is going to be another challenge, but all in good time, I guess.
Yeah, and actually, I was the governor had actually asked me to be on the workforce training board that he's reestablishing right now that the legislature kind of reset. So I get to have that conversation in Montpelier again about what we need. So that the timing is all working together really well, and we're seeing the benefits of the efforts that we've put in so far.
We've been talking to Rutland City Mayor Mike Doenges, and we have about 1 minute left. So I don't know whether you have any closing comments to make.
No, I just think I think everybody's rowing in the same direction, Brian. Like I said before, we had a lot of great organizations, legislators, lawmakers, locally, the state level, federally, all trying to get things moving. Our job at the city is to get out of the way and support. So lift the stone out of the hole, so to speak, and help push it along. And now go back to that original analogy. You've got everybody rowing in the same direction. We're starting to get that momentum, and we're seeing things happen. And I'm just really excited about it and excited about what we've gotten done so far. So.
Well, I'll extend on behalf of the Rutland Legislative Delegation. When Butch Shaw retired, they tapped me on the shoulder and asked whether I'd be the chair of the delegation. So I have accepted that, and I'll mention...
Thank you. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. If you ever are in Montpelier on a Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, you know this already.
I do.
We'd love to have you come by and be able to talk to the entire delegation, and I will send my best wishes to you for... we've already done Christmas, so belated Merry Christmas.
Belated Merry Christmas.
And a Happy New Year. And thank you very much for joining us today, Mike, and we'll see you soon.
Happy New Year to you too, Brian. Happy New Year, everybody listening. Thank you very much for having me.
And we'll look for all of you next week on Catamount Community Connection.